The Fiordland National Park in the southwest corner of the South Island was a must-see on my tour of New Zealand. My first base was Anau on the shores of the lake of the same name. The expectation was of picture postcard views, as indeed I first saw, but the reality is that the weather in Fiordland can change very quickly, as I found only an hour or so later. It can be really mean and moody, although that perhaps does show off some of the grandeur even more. I crossed my fingers and hoped that the double rainbow was a sign that matters were going to improve for my first fjord visit the next day, and thankfully that did dawn clear and bright.
My name's Russell, our crew today is Cliff, we have Peter along, we have Kelvin along, just for the ride.
The first part of the trip was an hour's cruise across Lake Manapuri. This is the only overland access to Doubtful Sound because there are no roads to it. Along the way we saw long white streaks down the mountainsides, and at first I thought they were waterfalls. Getting closer though, it turned out that they were the site of tree avalanches, where all the vegetation had slid down the steep hillside, leaving it bare. A short journey in a shuttle bus took us from the lake down to the fjord. There are two main tourist options for viewing Doubtful Sound: the day trip that I was on, or an overnight cruise using the Pattaya Explorer, seen here, which is complete with cabins. It also had sails it could use if the wind conditions were right. There was only one pier at Deep Cove, so arrivals and departures had to be carefully synchronised. In fact, there was a traffic system in place for the whole fjord, with all boats, big and small, going round in a clockwise direction. I have used the terms fjord and sound now several times, so I should clarify. The inlets are true fjords, having been created by glacial action before being flooded by the sea. The term sound would normally be used to describe a valley created by river erosion before being flooded by the sea, but the traditional names have stuck. Captain Cook originally used the name Doubtful Harbour when he discovered the inlet in 1770, because he was doubtful as to whether he could navigate it when under sail. His term harbour was later changed to sound by whalers working in the area. We went out to nearly the mouth of the sound, where we briefly met with the turbulent waters of the Tasman Sea. There is a view that the fjords are at their best in poor weather, which somehow adds to the grandeur of the mountains, and Deep Cove can get an incredible 53 metres of rain every year. When it rains, there are many instant waterfalls, but we saw only two of note. These are the 200-metre high Lady Alice Falls, which, we were told, would have had 100 times more water flowing over them immediately after the heavy overnight rain. They are described as horsetail for obvious reasons. As we headed back to Deep Cove, the weather seemed to be closing in again. The final falls were the Helena Falls. These can be reached by a walking trail from the end of the road, but it was a 2-hour round trek, so we did not have time for that. It was the turn of the Pattaya Explorer to vacate the pier to let us back into dock. On the short drive back up to Lake Manapuri, our coach took us deep underground to see the turbine hall of the West Arm power station. This was like a larger scale version of the cavern at Ben Cruachan in Scotland, and it is capable of producing 850 megawatts of power. By the time we were back on board our Fiordland flyer launch on Lake Manapuri, the rain had set in again, so we had been really lucky with the fjord part of our trip.
Have yourself a tea coffee, and please be careful as you move around the boat and stay safe and enjoy a run back down the land.
My next stopping point was Queenstown on the shores of Lake Wakatipu. My first sight as I arrived was of a very sedate steamboat gliding into the pier. The TSS Ernslaw dates from 1912 and is believed to be the oldest working coal-fired steamship in the Southern Hemisphere. She has been given the nickname of the Lady of the Lake. Originally a working boat taking all kinds of cargo up and down the lake, she is now a tourist pleasure boat. She makes multiple daily trips across Lake Wakatipu, and I later saw her heading off again. For an old lady, she has a good turn of speed, using her twin screw propellers to do 13 knots, which is about 15 miles an hour. She was named after the nearby Mount Ernslaw, which in turn had been named by a Scots surveyor, who hailed from a farm of the same name near Coldstream in the Scottish borders. The mountain in the background here is Cecil Peak, and the one next along is Walter Peak. Queenstown considers itself to be the adventure capital of New Zealand. Certainly, if you go up in the adjacent Ben Lomond Scenic Reserve in a gondola or a chairlift, there's a wide choice of ways of getting back down, by either tobogganing, mountain biking, or paragliding, not to mention the side options of bungee jumping and sky swings. The 720-metre trip in the Skyline Gondola takes just 3 or 4 minutes. At the top there is a restaurant with a viewing gallery. This provides a bird's eye view of Queenstown itself, its golf course, and there are panoramic views of Lake Wakatipu. The Ernslaw was again setting off up the lake and leaving a beautiful feather-like wake behind. The evening seemed to be a perfect time for the thermal air currents that allowed the paragliders to soar like birds. I felt sure initially that this one was heading for a landing on the golf course, but he had other ideas. Going back to my paraglider, I next thought it was going to be the public park he was going to land on. But amazingly, he kept going right over the town before fortunately finding a safe landing spot in a school playing field. It was time for me to head back down to be ready for my own bit of high flying the following day. This was to be my flight in a light aircraft to get over to the Milford Sound fjord. There is a road that goes to Milford, but it is a 240-kilometre round trip from Anau on some pretty scary roads. The scenic flight from Queenstown is a short 75-kilometre hop as the crow flies, and it provided spectacular views on the way. Although there were clouds obscuring some of the Richardson Mountains, they were still impressive, with the snow-capped peaks bursting through the clouds.
At the left-hand side here, guys, we've got the northern end of Lake Wakatipu. A small township coming up shortly is Glenorchy. It's about 200 people and about a 40-minute drive from Queenstown.
There was then a splendid view down the length of Lake Wakatipu before heading over the Humboldt Mountains and the Darn Mountains at the southern end of the Mount Aspiring National Park.
Got a couple of lakes coming up on the left-hand side here, tucked around the saddle. This is the Mount Aspiring National Park. Big valley here, this is the Hollyford Valley. Yeah, all this ice around here, this is all glacial ice, this remains here all year round. And about 2 to go there, straight in front of us.
Coming into land, we had our first sight of the very steep sides of Milford Sound, before chasing our own shadow down the airstrip. The iconic feature of Milford Sound is Mitre Peak. Although Milford Sound is smaller than Doubtful Sound, it boasts a multi-jetty landing stage, and with the many craft operating, it makes the following of the clockwise rule for all traffic even more important. We had a brief view of the 500 feet high Bowen Falls.
Yeah, we'll cruise on down the south side. On their cruises around the South Pacific. Largest ship to visitors so far, the Diamond Princess, weighing in at 116,000 tonnes, quite an impressive ship.
혹은 이곳이 밀포드 사운드에서 가장 넓은 곳이고요. 4km 정도 됩니다. 가장 좁은 곳은 500.
Again, tree slips were in evidence. It can take decades for the rocks to be covered again. Mitre Peak rises vertically from the water to a height of 5,500 feet, and the water below has an average depth of 1,000 feet.
저희가 지금 기부 지나가고 있는 바위 전력이 마이터픽이라는 산봉우리인데요. 이 산봉우리가 좀 유명합니다. 왜 유명하냐면 일단은 생긴 모양이 주교만들
Just going back around Dale Point, Milford Sound opening up in front of us. Milford Sound is not a sound at all, though. It's a true fjord carved out by glacial action, then flooded by the sea. Whereas a sound is something carved out by river action or earthquake action, then flooded by the sea.
The New Zealand fur seals were obviously enjoying relaxing on the rocks. The Stirling Falls had a sheer drop of some 500 feet, and our captain had some fun, taking us right into the spray at the foot. All too soon it was back to harbour and to the neighbouring airstrip where our planes were waiting. We took off heading straight for Mitre Peak, which was a bit worrying until we veered a bit to the right.
All the valleys around here, guys, great example of glacial valleys. All with really steep sides.
Heading back a little south of the fjord, we were lucky to get a great view of Lake Quill and the Sutherland Falls, which have a drop of 1,900 feet over 3 stages. Soon we were back over Lake Wakatipu and nearing our journey's end.